Hello, 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 and welcome to the powerhouse, or as biologists like to call it, the mitochondria. I'm Mehershad, and I'm a neuroscientist. But I didn't have to tell you that. I look exactly like what ChatGPT would come up with if your prompt was generic brain researcher. Some of you look confused. Why are there 4 of him? I'm obviously the one at the top right. So, just looking like a scientist is how I actually got this job in the first place. When this job was first advertised, most applicants sent in their CVs. I sent in a selfie. By the way, do you know, as a neuroscientist, do you know what really gets on my nerves? Nerves. Because nerves or neurons are the most important cells of our body. And yet, for whatever reason, our body doesn't have a way to repair it. Isn't that bizarre?
Yes.
Like, someone backstage said, break a leg to me. Which makes sense. Because at least a broken leg will heal itself. Broken neurons in your brain will not. Clearly. In fact, most cells in your body can repair themselves, and if and when they cannot be repaired, they are just replaced by new cells. Now, there's a reason that you can donate a frightening amount of blood, and your body will just make new blood. But for whatever reason, our body cannot make new neurons. I know, we should be able to make new neurons. It's in the name, neuron. By the way, do you guys think brains are important? Yeah?
Yeah.
Quick follow-up. Who do you think told you that? The fact that we cannot repair our most important cells is like our biggest design flaw. It is directly linked to terrible conditions such as Parkinson's disease, motor neuron disease, and what's that one? Alzheimer's disease. I always forget that one. So this is where me and my research step in to figure out how we can get these neurons to repair themselves and cure these terrible diseases. Now, in order to answer this complex problem, we as scientists had to go into an entirely new territory that we had never been before, outside, in nature. And when we did, we found out that this complex and highly sophisticated problem that plagues us, the world's most advanced species, was actually already solved by none other than, and I hope you're ready for this, a microscopic worm. That's right, a worm. Now, given that I am a foreigner with a Middle Eastern sounding name who's obsessed with spice and spends way too much time with worms, welcome to my talk. The world's most boring version of Dune. Now, these worms are called C. elegans, which, not to be confused with C. elegans, are found in gardens and in rotting fruit. But they're also microscopic, so you can't really see elegans. These worms have a wonderful ability to repair their neurons by regenerating them once they are damaged. And sorry, wrong slide. Yeah, and my research is trying to find out the exact molecules that allow these worms to repair its neurons. So I can steal it. Sorry, be inspired by it. Think of our neurons as overpriced iPhone chargers. Cords that connect the socket to the phone and conduct electrical charge. Now, in case of a nerve injury, this cord might have a break. Now, there's no electricity reaching the phone, or in case of our neurons, there's no signal reaching the brain. And we can all agree that this is a serious, serious problem. Not being able to use your phone. I guess also the nerve injury. Now, unfortunately, our brain shares the exact same service policy as Apple and refuses to repair these cords. Thank you, Android fans. The worm, however, is able to regenerate its neurons once they break. And look, while this is impressive already, you can imagine that regenerating the cord all the way to the phone can take a while, especially if the break is far away from the phone. So the worm goes a step further in what I think is a blatant attempt to add insult to our literal injury. The worm simply regenerates one half of this cord, just enough so it reaches the other half. And once they're in contact, it just fuses them or glues them together, completely repairing the neuron. Now, for the humans in the crowd, you might be insulted that the worm has such a cool mechanism protecting its neurons. The only thing we have protecting our neurons is a thick bony structure called the skull. And you know the skull is a bad idea because it has the same product design as the iPhone. Oh, these super important processing devices that control your life and are super impossible to repair and are super delicate, I guess we can just put it inside a case. What could possibly go wrong? Honestly, this is both anatomically and literally a worst case scenario. Whoever came up with the idea of a thick skull was probably thick-skulled. Now you might be wondering, Mehershad, why does the solution have to be worms and not something cool and human like neurosurgery? Good question, imaginary audience member. It's because it's really difficult. Our brains have hundreds of billions of neurons. Do you guys know how difficult it was to sort these single pair of earphones when they get entangled? Now imagine 100 billion earphones. And also, these neurons are 100 times thinner than human hair. Unless you're over 30, then they are exactly as thin as your hair. Worms, on the other hand, only have 302 neurons. So why bother dealing with hundreds of billions of neurons and open that whole can of worms when you can instead open a literal can of worms? Now, because they only have 302 neurons, we already know where each neuron is, what it does, and which neuron gossips with which other neuron. To quote the great Mark Twain, the worms are just like the Kardashian sisters. They are both one-dimensional, they are both models in their own fields, and they both have a countable number of brain cells. Now, over the last few decades, we have extensively studied the worm and its neurons and have figured out everything. You can say, just like the Kardashians, we have been keeping up with them. There are also other things that make it easier to study a worm brain as compared to a human brain. For example, unlike the Kardashians, the worms are completely transparent. This allows us to see the neurons inside of the worm while they are still alive. And this is really helpful. Now, obviously, you can't do this with humans because only one of these cases comes in a transparent version. Do you know how awkward it is to be a human brain that studies the worm brain in order to understand the human brain? But this can be extremely useful because, believe it or not, worms have a lot of the same genes as humans, and not just because we're both shopping at Levi's, but because we have the same evolutionary ancestor. If any of you have ever taken one of those 23andMe ancestry DNA tests and was shocked to find out that you were related to Tom Hanks or whatever, then guess what? We are all distant relatives of this worm. Please don't ask me how I got all of his salivas. Recently, my lab discovered that the gene that helps this worm regenerate its neurons is called ADAM1. Now, as the name suggests, it's part of the Adam family of genes. And since worms and humans are genetic relatives, we do have our own version of the Adam family of genes. We also found out that the worm Adam1 is actually quite similar to the human Adam22. Now, this is really, really useful because understanding the differences between these two molecules can help us know why one version allows the neurons to regenerate while the other doesn't. Now, if my version of Dune hasn't convinced you that worm neurons are important, just watch the original version that says the exact same thing. Now, for those who haven't seen it, the Dune stars, not these magnificent worms. They live inside the surface of the sand, and the entire plot of the movie Dune depends on the fact that these worms can sense vibrations from the surface of the sand. Vibrations that they sense because of a sensory neuron. The exact same neuron that I study in my worms. Now, just 2 minutes into this film, Timothy Chardonnay gets in this fight with some bad guys. The movement in the sand makes vibrations that the worm then senses. The worm comes up and saves Timothy Charmander here. Now, without this worm's ability to repair its neuron, it would have never sensed the vibrations. It would have never come up to the surface, and legit 2 minutes and 10 seconds into this film, Timothy Chevrolet would die and the movie would end. Do you guys understand what this means? That without worm neurons, Dune is no longer a major Hollywood film. It's a TikTok video. I hope I'm able to convince you that it's important to learn about these repair mechanisms and the genes involved in them, because that can help us turn our permanent nerve injuries into temporary ones. Especially since a microscopic, soil-dwelling, rotten fruit-eating worm is able to. Now, as the most advanced species on Earth, it's time we blatantly steal this worm's technology and exploit it to benefit ourselves and ourselves only. Okay, I know what you're thinking. Mehershad, the nerve. Thank you.